I'm Mike Naughton, and I'm the Managing Director for Asia at Thomson Reuters. Thomson Reuters is delighted to be sponsoring tonight's gala, and this is for the third year running. It is my pleasure to introduce this year's keynote speaker, Laura Cha. Laura is a member of the Executive Committee and Deputy Chairman of HSBC Asia Pacific. As a former lawyer, Laura worked in the SFC in Hong Kong for many years before being appointed by the Chinese government to be Vice Chairman of the China Securities Regulatory Commission. She was the first person outside of mainland China to join the central government at a vice ministerial level. Her extensive record of public services includes serving as the current chairman of the Preparatory Task Force on the Financial Services Development Council, serving as the former chairman of the University Grants Committee, serving on the advisory board of the Yale School of Management, and serving as a member of the Global Agenda Council on the Global Financial System for the World Economic Forum. Without further ado, please welcome Laura Cha.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, the Women's Foundation, for inviting me here tonight. It is always a pleasure to talk to fellow professional women, and it is a particular honor for me to be invited by the Women's Foundation, which has been doing such impressive and inspiration work to promote women's and girls' issues in Hong Kong. So thank you again, and I think you have done a wonderful job, and I think they deserve a well round of applause. In the summer of 1990, I was on vacation in a remote part of the US when I got a call from a good friend of mine who was a headhunter in Hong Kong. He had tracked me down to ask if I would be interested in a position at the newly established Securities and Futures Commission in Hong Kong. This came out of the blue totally. I was then a lawyer with the New York firm's Hong Kong office, handling major transactions for multinational companies. This was in the early days of China's economic reform, and foreign direct investments were rushing into China. My firm was then a trailblazer, and my work was exciting. I enjoy my work. I like my firm. I like my colleagues, and my clients like me. I was at a very comfortable stage in my career. I was on the verge of being made partner in my firm, and I had not thought of changing job, let alone changing course in my career. I told my friend I was not interested, but he urged me to at least meet with the chairman, and when I returned to Hong Kong, I did. To make a long story short, I spent the following 3 months meeting with the chairman and senior staff of the SFC and found what was being offered to me both fascinating and challenging. But I agonized over whether I should change career and whether it was the right time to do so. And finally, with considerable trepidation, I decided to step out of my comfort zone and join the new and untested territory of the SFC as an assistant director in the corporate finance division. And that was January 1991. Thus began my career in public sector. My initial 30-month contract eventually turned into a 10-year stay at the SFC, during which I moved up the rank step by step and became its deputy chairman in 1998. Little did I realize that my work at the SFC led me to my appointment by the central government in March of 2001 as the vice chairman of the China Securities Regulatory Commission. I was extremely honored to be the first outsider to work in the central government at a senior level. And I had the opportunity to take part in the development of China's financial markets in its early days. But this experience of a lifetime would not have come about had I not taken that somewhat tentative step to join the SFC in 1991. There are two lessons that I want to share with you from my experience tonight. First, you should not be afraid to take risks in your career. And second, working in the public sector brings immense gratification and unquantifiable rewards. But before I talk about taking risks in one's career, I should really emphasize that risk does not necessarily involve changing jobs or changing field. There are many distinguished careers which were spent over a long period in the same organization, and where the risk one encounter may come from internally instead of from external forces. Most people see career progression either within one's current firm or within one's field. Like most aspiring lawyers, I was setting my eyes on a partnership position at a major firm. That would be, to me, the ultimate recognition of my worth as a lawyer and also in the professional community. For me, there was an additional consideration personally. Because I started my career after having my 2 children, I was several years behind people of my age on the partnership track. So I was determined that nothing should hinder my path to partnership. There's a lot of sympathy to what one said, Susume said earlier, that we are all in a hurry to go somewhere. And I felt that I was already behind. And a lot can be said of a focused pursuit for a clear goal. And there are major considerations that would speak against taking any risk that might derail one's path to that clear goal. First, as you become good at and recognized for what you do well, you will be sought after for your expertise. The dilemma would then be you will end up doing the same thing over and over again, and others are unlikely to see you in a different capacity. Nor would you be willing to try your hand in a new area where success is less certain. There's also the issue of seniority. The more senior you are, the more responsibility you have, and the more secure you would feel in your job, and the more you would be giving up if you were to change to a different field. You are unlikely to consider any job that might be seen as less than your current standing in your field. And ironically, your choices of career change may actually become narrower as you become more senior, more specialized, and more known for what you do well. For a working mother, there's also an added issue of the demands at home. The age of your children may be a factor in determining whether it is time for you to devote the kind of extra effort in taking on a new job or changing a field. These are not easy issues to ponder. It would seem so obvious in hindsight now that the experience at the SFC might equip me with new skills for other employment opportunities. But at that time, I really could not see that after a stint at an unknown agency known as the SFC, the partnership position would still be open to me. I was concerned with the opportunity cost of a couple of years away from the partnership track. I was worried that I might not do well in an area where I have to learn new rules. I was hesitant about having to prove myself and establish my credibility all over again. There was also the issue of pay cut by switching to the public sector. But the attraction which led me to take on the risk of a change of career in the midstream was that it would broaden my horizon, allow me to develop new skills, and expose me to new areas which would not be available if I were to stay put in the same place. I was curious to find out what life was and what the world would be like outside of law practice, and whether I could make it in uncharted waters. There was a sense of adventure as I stepped into a brave new world. For me, the new universe turned out to be policy formulation in the public sector, something that I had never considered before. When I joined the SFC in 1991, I was the only woman in its 15 most senior staff and one of only 2 Chinese. The atmosphere was tense, aggressive, and combative, both within the organization and with the outside world. Not exactly a pleasant place to work. The learning curve that I had to climb was pretty steep. But I soon find that policy analysis and deliberation agree with me. My work was both interesting, challenging, and intellectually stimulating. The SFC was forging new grounds and fought political battle to restructure the stock and futures exchanges and rebuild the financial market of Hong Kong. The SFC was also establishing its credibility and making its marks on the market by being professional, forceful, and fair. Remember, our securities and futures market completely collapsed after the disastrous closure of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange during the 1987 global market crash. The SFC was set up by the government in the aftermath of the crash to take on an independent regulatory role. It was a new thing in Hong Kong then. It was in those difficult first few years that I honed my skills as a regulator and learned the ropes of being a policymaker. I was fortunate that in my 10 years at the SFC, I had the opportunity to play a part in all the major market reform initiatives, from restructuring the stock exchange in 1991 to 92, to the listing of X shares in 1993, and finally to the demutualization, merger, and listing of the stock and futures exchanges, as well as the 3 clearing houses in 1999 to 2000. Until I joined the SFC, I had no idea what working in the public sector entailed. Having now been a regulator in Hong Kong and China for a total of 14 years, and having spent the last 8 years holding various public service positions, I have come to believe very strongly about the merits of being involved or working in the public sector. In the private sector, the success of a work is often defined by the financial benefit you bring to your clients and your company, and you are rewarded accordingly. A job well done meant satisfied clients and happy bosses. Your sense of accomplishment may come from having done some economic good to society. In the event that you did not do such a good job, the effect would only be felt by your clients and your company, and with very little impact outside of that circle. In the public sector, however, the success of your work is not readily evident or definable by any benchmark, and there's often the frustration of the bureaucracy. What can be done for expediency in the private sector and consider reasonable approach may not be possible in the public sector, where the process is as important as the substance. Every procedure must be followed in order to avoid possible challenge from the public or any other affected parties. This is the kind of checks and balance to ensure fairness and to prevent misuse of power. So what is the attraction of working in the public sector then, you will ask? Well, the starting point of any policy formulation is to ensure that the society attained the best it possibly can, to correct what is not working, or to improve or bring about changes to society, be it in social welfare, financial markets, or any area affecting people's livelihood. The guiding principle is always public good and public interest. The benefit and cost of any policy must be balanced among the various stakeholders. The economic and long-term sustainability of the policy must be considered. Any collateral, spillover, or read-across effect into other sectors must be evaluated, and unintended consequences must be avoided at all costs. In other words, every new policy must go through a complete and holistic analysis. There is tremendous satisfaction in knowing that your work would actually make a difference to the community, that you can in fact be an agent of change. What kept me at the SFC was the opportunity to identify problems in the market and to propose and implement changes to make it work better. It was about taking a macro view of the landscape and mapping out strategies for the days ahead. It was about having an impact and being in a position to influence and bring about changes to make the market better. And I'm beginning to sound like a recruitment exercise for the SFC. But before I talk about public service, I wish to make a distinction between being in politics and working in the public sector. At the very top, working in the public sector is being in politics. But the majority of us would not equate the two to be the same. And I understand the Women's Foundation had a panel discussion on the subject of women in politics a few months ago, and I don't intend to dwell on this aspect tonight. For now, I wish to talk about the different ways in which one can get involved in public service. The first is, of course, joining the government or a statutory body, but that's not always possible. And short of becoming a civil servant, but there are other ways that you can be involved. Hong Kong has a very excellent tradition of involving people from the private sector in various government advisory committees. These committees advise and help the government in developing policies and provide the public officials with the views of the private sector and the real world. These committees require the participation and inputs of experienced professionals. One way to be involved is to participate in these kind of public government committees. And taking an active part will help you look at issues from a public interest point of view and provide you with the opportunity to understand how a policy is formulated. And believe me, the quality of your contribution and the seriousness of your participation will not go unnoticed by the government officials involved in these committees. At the same time, by engaging in an advisory or consultative process, you will learn new skills as well as keeping in touch with the community, which will in fact will benefit your career as well. I realize that full-time employment with the government is not always an option, particularly for mid-career professionals. I'm therefore a strong believer in secondment, where the public and private sector benefit each other from the experience of exchange staff. A couple of years with a government agency would provide a staff from the private sector with experience which he would never had, and it would be helpful to his or her career after returning to the private sector. And working in a private enterprise for a couple of years would also broaden a civil servant's perspective in his or her policy area and help him or her to understand better how policy affects the real world. In both cases, the secondees get the opportunity to see what it is like on the other side. But for this kind of cross-fertilization between the public and private sector, it is important for the companies in the private sector and professional firms in the private sector to look upon it not as lending a staff to the public sector, but it is an investment in training. And I think in other jurisdictions in the UK and the US, you often see mid-career professionals joining the government department or being seconded to government department for a couple of years. And I really would like to see that practice take off in Hong Kong. Whenever young people ask me for career advice, I would often encourage them to consider public sector as a possible career choice. But today, when the private sector provides such attractive financial prospects, it is not easy, realistic, for young people, young graduates, or mid-career professionals to think of anything else. Indeed, the idea of working in some sort of bureaucracy with very little financial benefit may be farthest from the minds of any graduates, and even less so on the part of the professionals. However, I often tell those who sought my advice that my 14 years of working in the public sector had given me a most rewarding and gratifying career. Being able to shape policy which will have an impact on our society, being able to actually effect change where one can in some way make a difference, is indeed a very worthwhile career choice, as well as an enriching experience. As I tell young people, you do not need to work in the public sector for your entire career, but if you are prepared to give a few years of your working life to the government and serve the public, it would benefit both the society and your future career prospect. And I think some of us in this room have felt that. And finally, I'd like to end my talk with what I usually tell those who are considering mid-year or mid-career change. There is life beyond work. There is a world beyond your company. And the universe is out there for you to spread your wings, explore the unknown, and reach your potentials. Thank you.